Can movies be art? You might think that's an unnecessary question, but surprisingly, it is a topic that is brought up for discussion more often than you think, even in recent years. Just make a Google search and you will find articles discussing it. Which is weird, because we already had an answer. In the beginning, film and cinema were regarded as a technical novelty. The birth of cinema is often attributed to the Lumiere brothers, who organized the first public and commercial screening of films in 1895. Allegedly, it ended with the audience fleeing from a theater because they thought the train shown on screen was about to crash into their screening room. That would have been an amazing fourth wall break. It's a fun story, but I couldn't find any confirmation for that myth. Despite the success of such events, the Lumiere brothers stopped making films in 1905 and instead continued developing devices for photography, which was their main business. For them and many others, film was a technical innovation, but not a means for artistic expression. Fast forward a couple of decades and that view had changed. Movies were neatly put into one of two categories: commercial and art films. Although there was not a clear definition what an art film even is. It basically came down to the question if it was a big-budget Hollywood-style project or something smaller, preferably from a foreign country. Foreign from the view of the United States, that is. But no matter the definition, these categories had a clear message that movies could be made with the goal of commercial success or for the purpose of art. So yes, movies could be art. Which didn't stop the discussion to go on, especially when the category of art films started to vanish. That's why 1978 is a rather important year for movies as an art form. It is the year a remarkable essay was printed in the yearly publication named The Great Ideas Today by the Encyclopædia Britannica. In between the articles, Management Medicine, the Doctor's Job Today, and The Idea of Religion Part 2, you could find Beyond Narrative, The Future of Feature Film by Roger Ebert. It's a long but very entertaining read, and if you are interested in the history of film and its conception as an art form, then I can highly recommend it. You can find a link in the sources I posted in the description. The author, Roger Ebert, is an important name for the movie industry. In 1967 he was assigned as the chief film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times, a position he held until his death in 2013. He was discussing movies most of his life, so he knew what he was talking about. And he knew it so well that he became the first film critic ever to receive the Pulitzer Prize, which is a clear indication that his article in The Great Ideas Today is not a coincidence. He deserved to get a spot to lay out his views on movies as an art form. When reading it, you can feel his passion for the subject, and he not only presents strong arguments why movies can indeed be art, but also discusses how trends of his time held the medium back to achieve an even greater artistic potential. But the best part of his essay is when he exhibits two examples, the film Persona by Ingmar Bergman and Free Women by Robert Altman. For both movies, Ebert describes aspects that made them more than just their pictures and sounds. He points out what made those films artistic. All of this is woven together to fit the overarching topic of his essay, and while he keeps a professional tone, his admiration for those movies shines through his words. These pieces of art left a lasting impression on him, and he is able to share that with his readers. So yes, movies can be art, and if somebody wants to discuss that point, then they should really read this essay. But this video and this channel are about video games. And in that context, the name Roger Ebert also holds some meaning. When you are among your peers, your fellow video game enjoyers, then this question will sound silly. Of course they can. There's usually no debate about it, but there is one common answer that you will hear most of the time when the question is brought up. One that is so powerful and so well known that it ends all discussions. Shadow of the Colossus. You fight these towering and magnificent beings, and all of them are somewhat unique. Some are action-focused, others feel more like a puzzle, but they all have one thing in common. The high you feel when you finally reach that sweet, sweet weak spot. As you struggle to hold your grip, you slam your blade into the titan as often as possible. Usually, the camera frames this as if you were watching a movie, and the music lifts these bombastic scenes to even greater highs. You might fall off and have to climb the Colossus again, or you might need to find additional weak spots. But sooner or later you will have reduced the health bar of your opponent enough so you can wind up your final attack, and then everything changes. A few seconds ago you were heroically fighting impossible odds, but now you watch as this once majestic creature falls. And after this chilling sight, the game puts you back in control just as these black tendrils emerge and start chasing you. There's not much you can do here, they will catch you and rob you of your consciousness, until you awake all the way back at the central temple. At first this seems puzzling, but the further you progress and the more colossi you slay, the more you will feel during these sections. Maybe it will be sadness or even grief, but maybe also determination to go on. Whatever the case, these sections definitely make you feel something, and you might find yourself thinking about the game long after you put the controller down. This has to be art, right? And that's why this question is silly. However, Shadow of the Colossus was released in 2005. While I agree that it's a great example when talking about video games and art, I don't think it should be the example, the one that is always mentioned, because it is hardly the first of its kind. 1 year earlier, for example, Half-Life 2 was released. Even today, Half-Life 2 can be considered one of the essential first-person shooters. It features one of the most believable game worlds despite all the sci-fi stuff you'll encounter. That's because of its revolutionary physics system and because of how realistic NPCs and enemies feel. All of this is embedded in a narrative that seamlessly unfolds during gameplay. In terms of immersing yourself into a world and a story, this is still one of the most profound experiences you can have. And if first-person shooters aren't your cup of tea, you might want to look at the game from the year before. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne is different to other JRPGs. First of all, it's infamously hard. From the first tutorial enemy that can crit and stunlock you, to the complex and nerve-wracking boss fights, this game will keep you on edge for the whole playthrough. And that fits to its premise. In Nocturne, you wander a bizarre and desolate world. Humanity is dead, and instead you have to deal with all kinds of demons. It's harsh and brutal, but despite that, this game has a lot to say. And it asks you a lot of questions. If the world was destroyed and you had the power to reshape it, would you bring humanity back? Or would you create a new world, and how would that look like? This is a game that makes you think. And it features Dante from the Devil May Cry series, so it has to be art. In terms of artistry, the year before, 2002, had a lot to offer. It's the year of Touhou 6, the embodiment of Scarlet Devil, and of Space Channel 5 Part 2, two games I just can't shut up about. But back then they were apparently too niche, because in terms of sales and critical acclaim, another title beat them out. Metroid Prime redefined what a Metroid game could be. Not only did it transfer the famed gameplay of the series into 3D, but it designed its systems, visuals and sound effects to put you into Samus's perspective, so you feel like you were in her famous suit and had to explore this alien planet. It's a masterclass in creating an atmosphere and invites the player to indulge in it. At least when it's not building up tension. Similar to the previous examples, Metroid Prime excels at immersing you in its experience. In addition, it might be the greatest at making the player identify with the character they are controlling, which is the opposite to what my example from 2001 achieved. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is famous for many of its quirks, but at the time of its release it was harshly criticized for how much it alienated the player from the character they were playing. Or rather, the character they wanted to play. Which is notable because, among many things, MGS2 is about a question who is actually in control. And if this sounds weird, that's because it's one of these games you need to have played to understand. It's a mind-bending journey full of twists and turns, moments that might enthrall you, and others that might shock you. Another great example for a game where you might find yourself thinking about what it had to say long after you finished it. And 1 year earlier, we had The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Where should I even begin here? Maybe with the popular theory that the different parts of the game represent the 5 stages of grief. Or the less popular theory that at the beginning of the game, Link died and Majora's Mask is his personal purgatory. If that's too heavy, maybe I can interest you in some social criticism, because one of the key problems that is presented to you, which is a rather urgent and undisputable problem, is just ignored by the leaders of this town, because they are hell-bent on conserving the status quo and celebrating their festival. There's so much in this game. It's a coming-of-age story, it's about facing your fears, can be creepy and desperate, but funny and heartwarming at the same time. For me, it's a game about people facing a time of need, who just need somebody, one person who is there for them. And in Majora's Mask, you can be that person. I might be wrong and overanalyze it, but the fact that there's so much you can see in this game, that clearly shows that this is a piece of art, right? And now look at the whole list. Quite impressive, don't you think? And I could easily go on. Because at the turn of the millennium, in December 1999, Shenmue was released. A game that follows the vision of its creative director Yu Suzuki and is uniquely grounded in reality. And 1998 has so many remarkable games that it's hard to pick one. So let's give Thief: The Dark Project a spotlight. Back then it was often described as a Doom clone, but praised for its innovative combination of gameplay systems. And today we can clearly see its influence on the immersive sim genre and on stealth games as well. Speaking of influence, 1997's Final Fantasy VII might still be one of the most influential games of all time, and even though it is from the last century, it set a standard that many modern games continue to aspire, and often fail. Even Square Enix themselves. And the list goes on. 96 Resident Evil, 95 Chrono Trigger, 94 Donkey Kong Country, and I don't think I need to introduce any of them. I could continue all the way back to Pac-Man, and as we all know, video games have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Inverse said it about the Emoji Movie in 2017.
Wow, these are a lot of stories for another day. What a list of impressive games, handpicked by me to showcase examples of artistry in gaming. And it clearly proves nothing. No, seriously, these are all great items for discussion, but only naming a bunch of examples is just reassuring my preconceived opinion. I firmly believe that all of these are really art, but picking one of them and describing how great it is, that's not a basis for a discussion. It's just reaffirming my beliefs. If we really want to answer if games can be art, then we cannot start here at the conclusion, we actually need to discuss it. To properly discuss it. And that includes listening to both sides and acknowledging their points. That's what I want to do here. And since I'm obviously in the gaming camp, I will now switch perspectives and look at some counter-arguments. This will be an exhausting exercise, but in the next sections I will try to show you why games can never be art. And when we sufficiently looked at that premise, then I will try to rebut these points. I will see if my opinion that video games can be art still holds up. I think these steps are necessary to get to an answer, and hopefully they will provide you with some points to think about, or even reasonings you can use when you find yourself in this discussion. And with that, I want to return to Roger Ebert and try to analyze what he actually had to say on this topic. As a film critic, Roger Ebert needed a film to enter the conversation about video games, and the one that pulled him in was the movie Doom from 2005. Which was some kind of adaptation of the legendary video game with the same name from 1993, which I will add to this list now. Anyway, in his critique of the film and in many interviews, panels and discussions that followed, Ebert made unfavorable comments about video games and declined the notion that they could be considered art. One curious thing to note is that during this whole discussion spanning multiple years, there was never a common definition for the term art that everybody agreed on. This kinda reflects the discussions scholars throughout history had about that term, and to this day, humanity hasn't produced a definition of art that is widely accepted. As Ebert puts it, we could play all day with definitions and find exceptions to everyone. And I don't want to do that. Instead, I suggest we use our intuitive understanding of art. We all know what art is in general, even though we might not be able to define it perfectly. This basic understanding might not be enough for a scientific debate, but to discuss if video games can be art, it is good enough. It was also sufficient for the discussion if movies can be art, so let's move on. Ebert's opinion motivated a lot of people to join the discussion and to contradict him. There were sophisticated attempts, one of which was a TED Talk by Kelly Santiago from 2009. At that time, she was working for That Game Company, the studio behind titles like Journey or Flower. Her talk was either so influential or so good that it prompted Ebert to directly respond to it with his famous essay Video Games Can Never Be Art from 2010, in which he dissects Santiago's arguments and decisively rejects the idea of video games being art. And this article still haunts the discussion today. Even though Ebert passed away in 2013, this is still regarded as the definitive counter-argument, and some people still take offense from it. Which is inappropriate, because it isn't the last time Ebert discussed the topic. In the same year, he published another article in the Chicago Sun-Times titled, "Okay Kids, Play on My Lawn." In this he admits that, and I quote, "I should not have written that entry without being more familiar with the actual experience of video games." He concedes that he is ultimately incapable to judge if video games are art or not. In his words, "I don't know if games can be inspired to transcend themselves. Perhaps they can. How can I say? I may be wrong." And he closes with a sentence which sounds insightful and bitter at the same time. "I was a fool for mentioning video games in the first place." With that, he withdrew from the conversation, openly accepting the possibility that video games could be art. So if anybody is still out there claiming that Roger Ebert hates video games or some related nonsense, and they only refer to his earlier article, then they haven't looked at the whole story. I personally think it's kinda sad the discussion ended like that. I think Ebert could have been a great participant in this discourse, and that's what I will try to do here. I want to discuss some of his most striking claims and see if they lead us closer to an answer about art and games. And the first one is probably his most discussed one. In November 2005, Roger Ebert made a rather infamous statement. The timing here is important because all the examples I listed earlier were already released. Despite that, Ebert wrote, "To my knowledge, no one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists and composers." My first instinct is to harshly contradict. However, if I really think about it, first of all, I reckon it's true that outside the field, meaning outside the gaming industry and the culture surrounding it, games are not treated as great pieces of art, worthy of comparison with other art forms. And even if there are some examples, they are in the minority and will probably start a controversy in their own field with such a thesis. But what about inside of our field? You probably have encountered some voices claiming that a specific game is a great piece of art, but is that the general consensus? If we look at the gaming community as a whole, would they agree that gaming should be viewed as high art? Maybe. But if that's the case, the community is rather secretive about it. Because if you look at discussions about video games, it is rarely a discourse about artistry or about the interpretation or the meaning of the game, but rather a discussion about review scores and financial success. And calling it a discussion is a farce, because it is rather about facts. The Metacritic score and revenue numbers. With those you can precisely assess the value of any given game. That's not a discussion about art, it's about products. And that's why we have reviews, to support purchase decisions. When IGN gave Hollow Knight Silksong a 9 out of 10 and wrote, "Silksong is packed full of sharp platforming, enticing exploration and nail-biting combats that's all unapologetically challenging in just the right way," then that's not a statement about the artistry. It's a guided recommendation so you as the customer can decide if that's a game you want to buy. And the discussion that followed about aspects like difficulty is ultimately about the same question. Is this game worth the time and money you need to invest in it? How fun is it? How good are the graphics? How big is the map? This is the main focus. Art can be a secondary factor here. An impressively artistic game might earn high review scores and maybe a fan favorite. But art is not the main point here, just an argument to explain why a game is good or bad. And how often do you see a review in which the critic goes into detail about what a game meant to them or why they think it's a piece of art? Actually, if you follow the discourse around certain games, you often see the opposite. And I'm sorry that I have to go there, I don't really want to talk about it. But some of the loudest voices in gaming culture don't actually talk about video games. Remember pronouns in Starfield? If you don't, then consider yourself lucky. The fact that you could change the pronouns of your player character on the creation screen led to an outcry and a discussion which had nothing to do with the game Starfield itself. It was not about art, not even about reviewing the game. Instead, Starfield was used as a vehicle to address topics outside of gaming. Don't get me wrong, discussing political views in games is a valid perspective, but only if the game in question is properly analyzed. Which was not the case here. Starfield was placed in a discussion it didn't belong to before people actually played it. I could name many more examples, but I don't want to give these a platform here. For me this is defilement, and if video games can be art, then these rage-baiting, fear-mongering, drama-inducing content creators are vomiting all over it. But nevertheless, they belong to the most influential voices in the field of video games. Their videos represent a huge chunk of the discourse around gaming, and with that in mind, I kinda agree with Roger Ebert. No one in the field can cite a worthy game. This is false, there are individuals who discuss gaming as art. But compared to product reviews, sales numbers and this garbage, they are in a vanishingly small minority. How can video games be art in a field like that? Even in Kelly Santiago's TED Talk, she justified examples she considers art by showing the market impact these games had. So we are back at sales numbers and review scores. Roger Ebert noticed that as well, and in his article from 2010, he used that to deal a devastating critical hit when he wrote, "I allow Santiago the last word." Toward the end of her presentation, she shows a visual with 6 circles, which represent, I gather, the components now forming for her brave new world of video games as art. The circles are labeled development, finance, publishing, marketing, education, and executive management. I rest my case. I gotta admit, this one stung. When Santiago showed this image in her presentation, she was talking about how to proceed with gaming as an art form and who should be involved. So these are the ones responsible for games, and you might notice that there aren't any artists listed. Well, to be fair, they are most likely part of development. This should include game designers, graphical artists, composers and the like. But they just have a small slice of this cake. Which begs the question, how can video games be art if the involvement of artists is this low? Because let's be real, most games are not made because of artistic ambition, they are made to make money. Let's look at an example. Halo Infinite. In 2019, the development team suffered a loss when creative director Tim Longo and executive producer Murray Olsen left the team. But apparently that didn't have any consequences on the artistic direction, because back then Microsoft put out a statement that the overall creative vision and production of the game remains led by Chris Lee. And Chris Lee became the new creative director. Until he left the team in 2020. In the end, Halo Infinite was released in December 2021. While the background of this alarming turnover rate in leading positions remains unclear, it is certain to say that this game lost some of its artists along the way, and according to Microsoft, even the one with the overall creative vision. How should we consider such a product art if the artists and their vision are easily replaceable? And Halo Infinite is a tame example. We could instead look at all these ads for mobile games and ask ourselves how we can consider them art. Or we could look at the most successful games, the ones that are played the most. And that's what I did. For this video I made an experiment and installed Fortnite. One disclaimer, I have never played Fortnite before. That's not because I think it's a bad game, but rather because I had no intention in testing it out. In the same vein as some people have no interest in playing strategy games or JRPGs, I feel no curiosity in the gameplay mix Fortnite offers. But this experiment was not about playing and reviewing Fortnite, instead I wanted to test how the game presents itself to new players. And here's what happened. First I had to create and connect an Epic Games account, typical live service game stuff. Once that was done, I was shown a nice little video before the game put me on this screen, where I could purchase a season pass. That would grant me access to cosmetic items like skins and emotes, and the characters showcased here were the ones I saw in the video before. So my first interaction with Fortnite was to watch an advertisement for the season pass and then make a decision if I wanted to buy said pass. I decided against it, which the game answered by putting me on the shop screen for the season pass, just in case I wanted to reconsider. With that, I was in the middle of this menu structure and I looked for a way to actually play the game. It was all the way over there, which meant that in order to really start playing, I had to pass through several other sections. First was the menu to customize my character, which harshly reminded me that at the moment I didn't have anything to customize. The next tab provided a solution because it was the shop for cosmetics, and as you can see there are a lot. Afterwards, there's a special promotion for items from South Park, which at the time of this experiment was the big showcase brand that cooperated with the game. And only then, after denying to buy anything for several times in a row, I could actually start playing the game. This whole structure has nothing to do with art or even game design. It is here because of business decisions. And looking at the financial success, these were probably good decisions. These brand corporations have nothing to do with artistic intention, they are marketing tools to get more attention. And there are many more examples for business decisions like that. Why did Overwatch 2 release without its promised single-player campaign? Why was Cyberpunk 2077 and most Bethesda games released in an obviously unfinished state? Why does Nintendo sell Switch 2 versions of games that were already released on the original Switch? Why do fighting games often have a higher number of DLC characters than their original roster? None of these are related to artistic ambitions. What did you say? While I was working on this video, they renamed Overwatch 2 into just Overwatch? Man, I wish they'd done so earlier. Then I could have used that as the perfect example instead of having to install Fortnite. Well, anyway, these examples are symptoms of one grim truth. Video games are products. Their existence is decided in board meetings, their purpose is to satisfy stake and shareholders, and they are designed to milk you, the player, for as much money as possible. And the fiercer they pursue that goal, the more successful these games can become. In this environment, art is just a bullet point on a PowerPoint slide, a feature that might support the overarching goal of making money. And with that, it's settled. Video games can never be art. But what about Donkey Kong? The song you're listening to right now is DK Island Swing, and it has an interesting origin story. When Rareware was working on Donkey Kong Country, they had to send demos to Nintendo so they could review the progress and the quality of the game. For one of those, Rare tasked their interim composer David Wise to come up with demo tracks for a jungle level. Wise composed 3 pieces, but he assumed that those were just for demonstrating a general feel. Donkey Kong Country was an important release for Nintendo, that's why he believed that the final soundtrack would be composed by Koji Kondo or another big-name composer of Nintendo. After the folks at Rare listened to his 3 songs, they told him to put them all together into one track, and that's what he did. The end result is the DK Island Swing that we know today, and you can still hear the 3 different sections that this song consists of. I think it's remarkable how David Wise connected these different themes, and Nintendo seemed to think so as well, because they greenlit the song, and that's how David Wise became the composer of Donkey Kong Country. And DK Island Swing became an iconic theme, which is still part of Donkey Kong's identity. This track is definitely a piece of art. And it's not the only one, Aquatic Ambience might be even more prestigious. Of course, Donkey Kong isn't the only one who can present remarkable soundtracks. I could name many examples, basically all of the stuff I have used as background music for this video. There are some great artists among video game composers, and I'm sure that Roger Ebert would agree. I couldn't find any quotes from him regarding music, however in 2005, at the beginning of his involvement in the discussion, he stated that a game can aspire to artistic importance as a visual experience, I accept. In other words, games can produce visuals that can be considered art. And the same is true for music too, we can all agree on that, right? No matter if you look at graphics and soundtracks of the current generation or go back a couple of decades, video games always had art to show, and it's undeniable that a lot of artists work on games. In the past, I already labeled the visuals of Ghost of Tsushima as artistic, and there's so much to look at here. The general art direction, the environment design, character design, visual effects, and many more, all the way back to the concept art. There are many remarkable pieces here. However, that doesn't make the game itself art, just a container for it. Like a museum. Just because a bunch of artistic paintings are gathered in a room doesn't mean that the room has become art. Unless the room or the museum has an artistic architecture, but that's not the point here. So even if we acknowledge that these visuals of Ghost of Tsushima and the music of David Wise, that all of these are great pieces of art, then we have only proven that video games are a nice container for these pieces, but not that they are art themselves. Because these pieces also work outside of their games. You can listen to DK Island Swing and watch images or videos of the most beautiful places in Ghost of Tsushima and never have to touch these games. Their art works separate from them. The art doesn't need the games they appear in. And here you might contradict. Because while these different pieces work on their own, the game transforms them into something more by combining different pieces into one cohesive experience. DK Island Swing works in conjunction with the visuals of the jungle level, with Donkey and Diddy Kong's character design, the sound effects, the animations and many more, and all of this combined is the actual art of the game. And Ghost of Tsushima is a great example for many more disciplines that join in, like the context in which these events happen. The plot of the story, the personality of these characters, their motivations and dialogues, all of these are part of the experience and they elevate these beautiful impressions into a journey with meaning and purpose. And the action on screen and the cutscenes enrich this journey, and here we can also see arts related to filmmaking, like the framing of these scenes and the camera angles. It is cinematic. And that's unfortunate, because this is where this whole reasoning evaporates. By combining all of these elements, we have only created a movie that can also be experienced without playing the game. Cinematic is often used as a positive descriptor for a game, that it has qualities like an entertaining story and a great combination of well thought out visuals and fitting music. We often praise games that are as cinematic as possible, without realizing that this also means that we could just as well experience them like a movie. This right here might be a great piece of art, but for experiencing it we once again don't need to actually play the game. So no matter how many pieces of art we pack into video games, no matter how many disciplines we combine, in the end they only prove that there is great art in games, but not that the games themselves are art. For that, a game would need to add something that elevated the art even further, so that only playing the game could provide you with the full experience. And that leads us to Ebert's final point. One obvious difference between art and games is that you can win a game. It has rules, points, objectives and an outcome. Over the course of his participation in the discourse, this is Ebert's most crucial point, and the reason why he claimed that games could never be art. Because the nature of games in principle contradicts art, and experiencing a game could lower the artistic experience. As an example, he brought up Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and came up with a hypothetical game in which the player could influence the outcome of the story and arrive at a different ending. In his opinion, this would deteriorate Romeo and Juliet. The interaction between the player and the game would reduce or even ruin Shakespeare's intention. In my opinion, it's a weak example, because many games neither allow that much freedom nor have different endings. But at its core, it's a valid claim. The decisions a player makes do influence the experience, so player choice can indeed take away from the artistic expression. Meaningful decisions are a core concept of video games, and they can create a lot of fun, but they also change how and what we perceive in a game. In Ghost of Tsushima, I can walk through this ethereal looking forest and appreciate its beauty, but I can also choose to move through it like this. And I can even choose to never come here at all. Whatever the artist who created the look and feel of this place intended, I can choose to ignore it, and even if I engage with it, I will probably never experience it in the exact same way as they intended. And if a game wants to convey its meaning through its story, but also allows meaningful decisions to influence the outcome, then there is a possibility that you won't even experience the story its creators had in mind. And all of this is made even worse by the very nature of the game that there is some kind of win state. You are playing to achieve an objective. It may vary what that means for any given game and any given player, but while playing, your mind is focused on achieving this win state. You are the one in charge in this interaction, and the deciding factor between winning and losing is your input. This active play is fundamentally different from experiencing art. You might want to contradict here and bring up examples where you as the player chose to not pursue objectives and instead stopped and enjoyed the experience. But in these moments, you were not playing a game. You were looking at a picture, listening to music, experiencing a story, or even watching a film. In these moments, the game becomes art, but it also stops being a game. This brings us back to the previous point. There is art in games, but it's optional content that you can experience when you are not actively playing to win, when you ignore the game, its rules and objectives, and instead focus on everything beside it. So this is how video games can be art, when they stop being games. To summarize, I have brought up 4 major reasonings for the claim that video games are not art. First, we have the topic that there are no widely accepted great pieces of art in gaming and that there is no sufficient discourse around them. Then there's the fact that video games are first and foremost products and that the decision to create a game is not made by artists. Next, I described how video games contain a lot of art, but why that doesn't make them art themselves. And finally, I explained why the aspects a game does add, its inherent attributes like rules and objectives, why they diminish experiencing art. And looking at these, I have to admit that I have to agree to some of these points. The biggest one is number 2, video games are products. The gaming market is dominated by huge corporations, and the biggest entries of every year are decided by them. That's why if you look at websites or content creators that talk about games, they tend to mention these companies a lot and often make connections between business decisions and the quality of games. It's an industry driven by making profits, gaining dominance in marketing, and somehow handling the exploding costs of producing a big budget title. All of this is impeding the growth of video games as an art form, and that's why I have to make a first concession. Not every video game is art. I am convinced that video games can be art and a product at the same time, but the sentence already implies that video games in general are not automatically art. This reflects Roger Ebert's view on movies, because he once claimed, "Hardly any movies are art." And I think we have a similar situation in both mediums, a big budget industry that dominates the conversation around it. If a film or video game wants to be considered as art, then it needs to be more than just a product designed to maximize profits. It needs to do more than just appeal to the masses, follow current trends, or repeat what was successful in the past. It has to explore new ideas, work with its medium, and move it forward in some way. It needs to add something to its genre, have its own identity, and maybe even show you new possibilities. It needs to have artistic intent. I admit that sounded esoteric, so let's be more specific. A video game doesn't become art because of its Metacritic score, its daily users, or its sales numbers. And it also doesn't become art because of its soundtrack, its amazing graphics, its frame rate, or its captivating story. These can make it a good product and even a good container for art. But for the game itself to become art, we need to return to that fourth point, because this is the one I wholeheartedly contradict. My thesis and my answer to that whole question is, gameplay can be art. Interactivity and the ability of the player to make meaningful decisions can diminish the artistic intent. But at the same time, this is also where gaming's greatest potential lies. Just as it can negatively impact how you perceive the art, it can just as well have a positive effect. The mechanics, the rules and objectives can transform it to something more. When designed carefully, they can add to it and enhance your experience. Instead of just hearing and seeing it, the interactivity can offer a new perspective on the art. Coming back to Shadow of the Colossus, you could of course enjoy watching it as a film. Seeing how the wanderer climbs on his foe and slowly but steadily defeats it, that is entertaining and could possibly be considered art. But experiencing these beings in-game by studying their behaviors, forming strategies on how to defeat them, maybe failing a couple of times, getting crushed by their attacks, only to try again until you finally succeed and reach its weak spot. This immersion into the wanderer's struggle could not be transported by a film. The interactivity is needed to truly experience these colossi, and the gameplay is designed around that premise. Systems like the grip meter that might cause you to fall off, or the risk and reward system of these excessive and overly long wind-ups before every step, they all pull you even deeper into the wanderer's perspective, and they force you to create an understanding on how each of these beings moves and reacts. And the fact that you have a clear objective that you are playing to win adds another aspect that games can provide: agency. In Shadow of the Colossus, you need to kill the colossi. That's the goal set by the story, and that enhances the experience of fighting them even further. You as the player and the wanderer as the character, you both want to succeed, and that's why both of you are willing to get through the struggle of climbing these beasts and managing the grip meter. Or do you? Because the game not only uses its objective to motivate you for these fights, but at some point you also start to question why you even kill them. Is it of your own volition, or are you just blindly following orders? And do you actually achieve anything by killing one after the other, or are you just destroying yourself? All of this is presented subtly. Until the ending, the game never directly spells these thoughts out, but while watching these sad and reflective scenes after each of your victories, you will sooner or later get this eerie feeling that something is wrong. If they ever make a movie adaptation of Shadow of the Colossus, they won't be able to catch the feeling of these moments. They hit so hard because you, the player, did this. The interactions you had with this creature and your will to get to this win state, that's the reason this happened. The gameplay enhances these moments. And it might be small, but I think it's genius that you are given back control in these short segments where the black tendrils chase you. Not only does it connect these events with your actions during the fight, it also asks you how you react to the murder of this being. Do you run away or face the consequences? All of this would not work without the game. The rules and objectives, the game design, that's what makes this experience possible. This is how games can become art through gameplay. And if we return to this list, I could show you more examples. Like how the elaborate behavior of the NPCs invite you to interact with Half-Life 2's characters. Or how getting crushed by Matador over and over again stresses the cruelty of Shin Megami Tensei 3's world. Or how Metal Gear Solid 2 plays with your objective and your agency. And Majora's Mask's entire thing, that's definitely a story for another day. So coming back to these arguments, I obviously also contradict with number 1, that there are no great pieces of art in video games worthy to be compared with the greatest of other art forms. This one was discussed a lot, and one common counter was brought up by Kelly Santiago in the GDC talk we saw earlier. She shows us a picture of cave paintings before contrasting them with an image of the Sistine Chapel's fresco. Both are art, but one is obviously not as developed as the other. Santiago alludes to the possibility that video games are closer to the cave painting. So they are definitely art, but still in a state of infancy, which makes it hard to realize their artistic potential. It is clever reasoning, but I would contradict Santiago here. I think video games are already past that stage, and I can think of examples that can be considered fully developed great pieces of art. One of which would be Journey, a game of Santiago's studio. However, while I think that some video games have already achieved the status of high art, I also think that the culture surrounding games has not yet reached an appropriate level. To me, the discourse around gaming often feels like cavemen judging Michelangelo's fresco. The fact that the artistry of games is questioned is not the fault of games alone, but also of all of these who still talk about them like simple products. Or maybe just use them to click or rage bait. There are exceptions though. Some individuals see these pieces of art for what they are and talk about them accordingly. Metal Gear Solid 4 was a mistake by Steak Bentley. Just a simple strategy game by K-Bash, also known as the other Kevin on YouTube. Or Action Button reviews Pac-Man by Action Button. These are some influential voices that discuss video games as art. And sorry Tim if I'm putting words into your mouth here, but this one bit from your Pac-Man review sounds like you were directly responding to Roger Ebert.
Forget the Citizen Kane of video games. What's the Pac-Man of movies?
We need more of these discussions, and we need them to be at the forefront of the conversation. That's how we can show that video games can be art. Because they can, and they have, and they will be. In the multi-billion-dollar industry they are living in, it might be hard to find those titles, but there are more than enough. I myself might not be an influential voice, but I attempt to contribute to that cause. While the artistry is not always at the forefront, my storytime videos try to showcase remarkable examples where the gameplay really added something to the experience. How Crypt of the Necrodancer combined its game design and music to create a rhythmic experience you can find nowhere else. How Touhou 6 brought its characters to life with the mechanics of their boss fights. How Elden Ring set you on an adventure by letting you choose to search for Malenia yourself instead of guiding you directly to her. And how Valkyria Chronicles 4 makes you a part of this group of characters and then confronts you with many meaningful decisions and their grave consequences. For me, these are great case studies for video games that use their mechanics, systems and goals to create an experience you cannot find in other art forms. And the Dynamite Heady video is an outlier, because its focus on difficulty led me into another direction. Maybe discussions like these would have been able to convince even Roger Ebert, because that's what he did with movies as well. His article, Beyond Narrative, I mentioned in the beginning, could actually serve as a great guideline on how to progress the discourse around video games. Similar to movies in the last century, we are at a point where we often divide games based on who produced them. AAA games and indie games fulfill similar roles like commercial and art films. So we might learn something from his article from 1978. And to honor that thought and his great work, I will now try to do what Ebert did back then. Next to all the points he made, it were his words about the film's persona and three women that spoke to me the most. So I will now discuss one example that managed to move and inspire me and which serves as my personal proof that video games can be art. Ico was released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. At that point, the most successful console to date already had an established library of great games, one of which I already mentioned earlier. Still, Ico managed to create an impact, but not as a product in the classic sense. If we do what I condemned earlier and look at its sales figures, then we can see that it was obviously not a huge hit, especially compared to other juggernauts in the early life cycle of the PlayStation 2. So we could classify it as a decent product that failed to reach its market potential. But that's not how anybody discusses Ico. Actually, it might be a great counterpoint to video games are products, because in the case of Ico, most people flat out ignore its market success when talking about it. And people did talk about it a lot. My favorite example has to be Hidetaka Miyazaki, the famous mind behind the Dark Souls series, who gave us the following quote about Ico. "That game awoke me to the possibilities of the medium. I wanted to make one myself." Just let that sink in for a moment. And Miyazaki is in good company. Many big names of the industry have cited Ico as a major inspiration for them. Hideo Kojima of the Metal Gear series and Genova Chen, designer of Journey, are just two examples that connect Ico to games that were already mentioned today. Other big titles that name it as an influence include The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Halo 4, The Last of Us, and Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. And these were just a few among many examples. If you have a favorite game designer, chances are that at some point they talked about Ico. And I even dug up a quote by film director Guillermo del Toro, who stated, "There are only two games I consider masterpieces, Ico and Shadow of the Colossus." In the same interview, he would later explain how games had an influence on his way of directing movies. This is just one case, of course, but it does directly challenge Roger Ebert's statement from earlier, and now we even have somebody outside the field. But that's not my point here. Instead, the takeaway message is that Ico is a big deal for many people, and it had an impact on games that would follow. And all of that despite its low sales numbers. So there must be something special in this game, something that you cannot find anywhere else. So let's stop talking about Ico the product and instead look at Ico the game. It begins with a cutscene that introduces the scenario you find yourself in. You see this group of warriors that bring a boy to a castle. This boy is named Ico, and it's the character you will be controlling. His special feature are his horns, which are considered a curse in his homeland, and that's why he's brought to this castle as a sacrifice. After a rather convoluted process, the warriors deliver Ico to this structure, where he is held captive, and the warriors depart with the words, "Yeah, thanks." That would have been the end for Ico, but for some reason, maybe it was just luck, his stony prison tumbles over and he gets free. And this is where the game puts you in control. The setup is rather simple, but very effective in establishing your goal. You need to get out of this castle. This is what Ico is about. In fact, the whole game takes place inside of the castle and its various areas, and exploring them is one of the main activities you will be doing. You can't just simply walk out, instead you will need to find a way through the castle and need to look for stuff that might help you out, like these bombs or these drawbridges. And there are also puzzles in your way. So at its core, Ico is a typical adventure game. However, while looking at this footage, you might have noticed that something is missing. Actually, when comparing it to modern games, there are many things missing. Ico forgoes a bunch of typical gaming features, first and foremost UI elements. This was a deliberate decision by the game's designer, Fumito Ueda. In an earlier state, Ico contained a proper gaming UI and many more features and locations, but they were all scrapped because Ueda used a method that would later become known as design by subtraction. The basic idea is that you try to subtract anything that doesn't support the main point of the game, its central feature. And in the case of Ico, HUD elements, a health system, a map or inventory screen were all deemed unnecessary. A reduced experience like that was quite unique in its generation, and it leads to an overall slick and quick playthrough. You could argue that Ueda and his team overdid it, that some additions would have spiced up the gameplay, and I would agree. The puzzle design and especially the combat can feel too reduced and repetitive at times. When asked after a presentation, even Ueda himself admitted that he might have subtracted too much. Nevertheless, it achieved its goal. It made Ico into a video game which is laser focused on its central concept, its most important component. You meet the girl in white at the beginning. Like you, she's imprisoned. Her situation seems different though, but at first you can only speculate because communication with her proves to be difficult. This is bold. You will spend most of the game with the girl in white, and next to that guy earlier, she's one of the few characters with voice lines. And she doesn't speak your language. She is the main character you will be interacting with, but you can never be sure what she is saying, and you will never truly know if she understands what you want to communicate. And communicating with her would be beneficial, because from here on out, you are in this together. Earlier I stated that the goal of the game is to get out, but that was only half true. The actual goal is to get out of this castle together. Even if you don't feel any compassion towards the girl and would just like to leave her here, you don't have any choice, because Iko cannot make it out of this castle alone. There are several of these barricades, or doors if you will, and you have no way to open them. The girl in white, on the other hand, can just do this. Weird, but it does the trick. You need her to advance through the castle. She's your master key to open all of these gates. And she needs you, because Iko is much more agile and can reach many places that are inaccessible to her. This dynamic forms the basis for most puzzles. You not only need to find a way to progress, you also need to bring the girl in white with you, and that can prove tricky. Tricky is also a good word to describe the combat. Your first fight starts immediately after you freed her from her cage. Depending on how furious you attack, you might miss it here, but in the battles that follow you will notice the strange rules this combat system follows. Iko is invulnerable. These shadowy figures can attack him, and judging by his reaction it does hurt, but they have no way of killing him. There's no need for a health bar because you basically have infinite health, which would make the combat boring, but you will soon notice that it isn't really about Iko. The shadows will attack you if you get too close or are standing in their way, but if you leave them be, they will ignore you, because they have a different target. All shadows will try to get to the girl in white. She has no real way to defend herself, so if they reach her, she will be overwhelmed and carried away. Once she is captured, the shadows will try to bring her back to their spawning point, these black abysses that will slowly swallow her up. You can pull her out, but if you cannot save her in time, this happens. This is the main failed state of the game. So combat is not primarily about defeating all the enemies, it is about protecting the girl in white. And this is when you realize that Iko is one big escort mission. This might be a deal breaker for some. Escort missions have a bad reputation in gaming, and to be honest, most of them deserve it. They often result in a limiting experience in which the game holds the player back. They feel slow, and depending on the AI of the NPC you are protecting, it might even be frustrating. Escorting the girl in white in Iko is certainly not perfect. This is an area where the game can easily be criticized, but it does add to the overall experience because, as I said earlier, Iko is about getting out of this castle together. Interacting with the girl and protecting her is what this game is about. And compared to other escort scenarios, there is something special here. You need her to advance, she can open all the doors, and you soon learn why that is. When you reach the main gate of the castle, a cutscene triggers. Of course, the game won't let you out that easily. Instead, the scene is mainly about introducing the Dark Queen. She starts by talking in the same language the girl in white uses, but then she addresses you directly and reveals one crucial fact. Suddenly it all makes sense. That's why she can open these doors. This girl, Yoda, is part of this castle. And that's why the shadows were after her, to bring the queen's daughter back. Curiously, the queen doesn't use this golden opportunity to take Yoda herself. Instead, she just vanishes at the end of her speech. This might seem dumb, but there is an actual reason for that. In fact, if you are attentive, you will find reasons for most of the game's events, even why your stony prison fell over in the beginning. So you get a lot of new context, and with the way how the queen spoke about her daughter, and because of how she clearly doesn't want to be abducted by the shadows, Iko has even more reasons to bring Yoda with him. So the basic premise stays the same: get out of this castle together. But with the main gate closed, you will need to continue exploring. And this grants the game even more opportunities to examine the relationship of its two main characters. From here on out, the puzzle design really gets going and presents you many different situations. The most tense are those that force you to leave Yoda behind and advance for yourself. By now you will have learned the basic rules of the game and know that whenever you leave Yoda alone for too long, shadows will appear to take her. That makes these moments in which you are by yourself really tense, and if possible you want to avoid them. When you think about it, it's kinda funny. The moments which felt the most restrictive to me, when I felt the urge to progress as fast as possible and when I didn't want to explore anything of the castle, were those when I was not escorting Yorda. In theory, these could have felt liberating, I could finally move at my own pace. But in reality, I was constantly thinking about how I could get back to her. Without Yorda, I felt vulnerable, and that's because I was. I might have been in control of the more agile character that's also the better fighter, but Yorda was not only my master key, she was also my health. And not being sure when she would be attacked made me anxious. I wanted to be close to her, because that's when I felt safe. And there's one mechanic in the game which allows you to do that. Holding hands. You have a dedicated Yorda button on your controller, R2, one of your shoulder buttons. When you press it, Iko will call for Yorda, which in most cases will prompt her to move towards you. If you hold it down, Iko will actively search for her, which is indicated by the camera moving in her direction. When you are close to her though, pressing and holding the button will make Iko reach out his hand and Yorda will take it. As long as you keep pressing, you will be holding hands, which creates a physical connection between these characters, a visible bond. This is how you can move as one unit, and it's the safest state you can reach in this game. One remarkable thing about this is that in order to keep the shoulder button pressed, your grip on the controller is similar to actually holding a hand. And I observed myself how I tightened my grip whenever the situation got more tense, which is probably what Iko did as well when shadows were closing in. In a way, holding hands is the central mechanic of the game. It is one of the few instances when you can clearly communicate with Yorda. By connecting and then leading her around, you can literally control her movement. But as powerful as this might seem, you don't actually have to hold Yorda's hand. It's just an option, and there are also benefits to let her wander around on her own. Especially during the more complicated puzzle sections, because from time to time, Yorda can solve the puzzles on her own and will tell you what to do. At least in her words, but because of the language barrier you will just receive vague hints. This isn't the only example of Yorda thinking for herself. Especially during combat, it becomes obvious that she isn't just a lifeless game object. While she cannot fight back, Yorda will try to avoid the shadows by positioning herself strategically. Actually, by observing how she moves, you can anticipate threats that are not on screen yet, or even identify which of the shadows is making a move next. And in my playthrough when she got caught, it was usually because I got too reckless and wasn't paying enough attention. So when you begin observing what Yorda is doing or what she tries to communicate, then she becomes a valuable ally. And she becomes a character. You will start to notice her body language. For example, when you open a door and she excitedly rushes through, you know that something important is coming up. She is familiar with this place, and with that, Yorda has a peculiar role. You might feel in control while you explore, but in reality she knows this place much better than you. In a way, she is part of this castle, a representative of it, and if she were able to directly talk to you, the route through the castle would be clear and you just needed to follow her orders. And if you continue on that train of thought and remember that the whole game takes place in this castle, then Yorda is not only a representative of this place, but for the game itself. In reality, she is an object of this game. She was designed and programmed. You control the character Iko, and when Iko interacts with Yorda, then on a meta level, you the player are interacting with the game. And that's another facet that makes connecting to her so special. This is what this game is about, and why Ueda and his team wanted to subtract any unnecessary features. Iko should not be about its combat or puzzles, those are just elements to support its main focus. The connection between Iko and Yorda. And this is what makes holding hands such a powerful mechanic. At first it will just feel convenient to directly control Yorda's movement, but over time, holding her hand will make you feel secure. There are many obstacles in your way and dangers to face, but you are in this together. As long as Iko and Yorda are holding hands, the game will not hurt you. As long as the two of you are together, everything is fine. And if you never played Iko, this might sound hyperbolic or even silly. You might be thinking that holding hands is just pressing a button to trigger a useful mechanic. And this connection with a fictional character sounds esoteric, and so far I couldn't really show you anything to prove it. And that's exactly why Iko is my example for art in video games, because its message, its main point, cannot simply be transported by telling a story or by watching a playthrough. Yorda and the way she is implemented is art. The communication with her and the bond between these characters is art too. Iko the game is a piece of art. But without playing it, it's not really possible to experience it. The game adds something that only a video game can offer, and the connection with Yorda is the result. A movie adaptation or a novelization could never transport that feeling of holding her hand. And luckily for me, there actually is a novel about Iko. In 2004, Japanese author Miyuki Miyabe wrote the book Ico Castle in the Mist. And it proves my point, because while it retells the story of the game, it is also filled with lots of background information and lore. These take up more pages than the events of the game, and I think that makes sense, because just retelling the game in book form would have been a hollow experience. With these additional information, the book becomes interesting, but the game didn't need that, because it already had an artistic core. And Miyabe probably knew that she couldn't adapt that into her novel. Ico works as the perfect counter-argument against the fourth point from earlier. To me, it clearly proves that gameplay itself can be art. When I first played it, I didn't immediately realize it, but near the end of the game there is one segment that really drives its message home, one that was so powerful that it opened my eyes. And even though I already explained my point, I just have to talk about it. After you've explored almost any nook and cranny of the castle, you will finally have found a way to open the gate that was keeping you from escaping. This is the big moment the game was preparing, but before we can talk about it, I have to explain one mechanic, a little trick the game uses. It might seem minor, but cutscenes directly transition into gameplay. The line between watching and playing is blurry because you can already control Ico while the transition is happening. Actually, during the most stressful scenes, like when enemies appear, you will notice that you can already start moving while this letterbox effect is still on screen. The game teaches you a simple lesson. Cutscenes end earlier than it seems, and when you see Ico on screen and have the feeling that the scene is coming to an end, then you should begin inputting a direction. In most cases, it only leads to a minor advantage. Nevertheless, the game teaches you this quirk on purpose, and it will play a role in the scene that follows when you open that gate. By which I mean that Yorda opens the gate by using her special powers while you watch her. Once again, it is her familiarity with this castle that lets you move forward. But this time, moving forward finally means getting out. The last hurdle to take is the somewhat foreboding bridge. The game puts you back in control, the cutscene fades out, and off you go. However, on this last stretch, the game stresses once again that it's an escort mission, and bringing Yorda with you gets cumbersome. She is visibly weakened from opening the gate, and the game really wants you to feel how hard it is for her to go on. So you slowly stumble forward until... This is rough. Not only do you have to watch how Yorda gets zapped and knocked down, but then the game commits the cardinal sin of forcefully separating the two of you. Yorda was struggling before, but you were together and that's why you felt safe, but then the control is snatched from you by a cutscene. Afterwards, you find yourself in this horrible situation. Yorda is at her limit and the gap between you is getting larger. This is when you regain control. Just like you witnessed many times before, the game enables your inputs before the cutscene is finished. You are forced into this situation, there's no way to prevent it, but how you deal with it is up to you. You are not watching a movie, you are playing a game, and this right here is a choice. When I played this scene for the first time, I was not thinking about the rules and the mechanics of the game. All I wanted was to get back to Yorda. I wanted to get out together, so there was just one thing I could do. One thing I had to do. Jumping here is interesting, because from everything that I had learned, this was not a jump I could make. There are some tricky jumps in the game, and there's also the mechanic in which you help Yorda out during her jumps. This is another ability that symbolizes the trust you build with her, and it offers one more application for holding hands. Reaching out and catching her is like the double jump of holding hands. But while you become familiar with this skill, you also learn that this is something only Ico can do. Yorda's not capable of catching you, you need to make your jumps by yourself. And I did remember that while I was lining up my jump. My knowledge with the game clearly told me that jumping was stupid, suicide. Yet I still did it. Because this was not a cognitive decision or a clever gaming move, it was purely emotional. I just wanted to get closer to Yorda, no matter the consequences, and then... Yorda broke the rules of the game for me. I don't need to explain what's happening here. This scene is just pure magic. But magic is not enough. At this point, Yorda realizes that there's no way to win this. But she keeps pressing that shoulder button anyway and holds your hand for as long as she can. Until the game finally separates you. And then she says, I wasn't able to translate it, but I felt what she wanted to say. In this moment, when all hope was lost, and Yoda knew that you wouldn't be able to get out together, she had one last thing she wanted to communicate. And I understood. When she said, I felt it in my heart. There was no way to understand her words, but I was able to understand her feelings. And this scene would never work in another medium. The relationship you build with Yoda is not transported by images or sound, it is in the interactions you had, in the way you try to communicate. This is your final moment together, and you, the player, have a major role here. You have a choice, you are not forced to jump. If for whatever reason you decide to not get to Yoda, you can also try to run away. Actually, this would seem like the smart thing to do, were it not for these gate blocks that only Yoda can open. You cannot get out alone, the game screams at you, while you wait for your inevitable fall. In the end, the game is a linear experience, you are doomed to fall here, but you decide how. In a desperate attempt to save yourself, or in a doomed longing to hold Yoda's hand just one more time. And once again, I'm not sure if any of this makes sense if you haven't played Ico yourself. I'm really trying here, but in the end, only playing the game can convey these feelings. Any other way of experiencing it is inferior. At least I know that I'm not alone. I'm like 90% sure that Miyazaki was referring to this scene when he said that Ico awoke into the possibilities of this medium. It certainly awoke something in me. The communication with Yoda and with the game itself is truly special, and thanks to design by subtraction, it takes center stage as soon as Yoda is introduced. Unfortunately, everything that is not interacting with Yoda is mostly mediocre. I do like the castle's overall design, but it gets old fast, and the puzzles and especially the combat are nothing to write home about. They can even get boring. But whenever the game focuses on these two, it becomes untouchable. A visionary piece of art, and this makes the scene at the bridge the perfect climax. You and the game need to work together to reach this magical moment. And while it's dramatic and even sad, as long as the two of you are holding hands, the world just feels right. But nothing lasts forever, so Yoda sends you off. And if you are still wondering about what it is she had to say, then the game offers a solution. The language Yoda uses is not just gibberish, but follows a logic you can decipher. You don't need to do that though, because if you beat the game, you can start another round in which all of Yoda's lines get translated. This doesn't change the game, Ico is still unable to understand her, it's just a bonus for the player. And with that, I could confirm that I really did understand her final message. Seriously, go play this game if you haven't already. I have spoiled a lot here, but actually playing it is something else. Art is not just something to look at, it needs to be experienced, and in that regard, Ico might be one of the greatest pieces of the 21st century. And with that, I want to close this discussion. For me, Ico did actually add something by being a video game. It is not just a product or a container for art, the game itself transcends into something more. And for me, it is worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists and composers. Video games can be art. But that's just my conclusion. I wanted to offer different perspectives on this topic, so feel free to form your own. In the end, our view on art is always subjective, and that's why it's worth discussing it. I don't see this video as the definitive answer. Instead, I hope that I inspired you to join in on these thoughts. Because video games are a cool topic, and so is art. Speaking of art, I have another thing to show you. You probably noticed that I replaced Shadow as my avatar. He did a great job to get me going, but I needed an individual character to better portray me. And this is it, the new image of the storyteller. This piece was created by Hugh, a talented artist with an interesting style, and I put a link into the description where you can find more of his stuff. Go check it out! And you can also check out the many videos I recommended over the course of this story. Their links are in the description as well. At this point I want to add one more, an alternate view on Ico. And in my opinion, the retrospective by Matthew Matosis is one of the best on this topic. You will learn many new things, because his video provides a complete look at the game, while mine was busy focusing on artistry. That was certainly different to my other videos. Working on this discussion/opinion piece was a new experience, but while I enjoyed creating this one, it will stay an exception, and I will return to my usual formats. The next big one will be another example of a game that adds something artistic through its game design, although in a completely different way than Ico. It will be a saga about an archfiend, a matriarch, and capitalism. This one will be special for me because it tackles one of the earliest stories for another day I alluded to. But before that, there's a smaller project I want to complete, which picks up a thread from my first storytime video. There's one last thing I'd like to mention. I know that my videos take an unreasonable amount of time to finish, and that's because I'm working on them as a hobby. And that's fine, I enjoy my time with them, but I would love to get more professional and put more time in them consistently. If this is something you'd like to support, then please consider checking out my freshly created Patreon. Right now there's not much in form of bonus content, just some more info on my videos. I appreciate every support I get, and if Patreon is not your thing, then you can also help me with the typical YouTube stuff like subscribing. You know the drill. But no matter how much support I get, I will continue creating these videos, so I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Nonomori for watching, and stay tuned.